Okay, so let's get going. I can see that the calculator is counting a little bit slower, at least at this time. And we have a short and efficient 30 minutes in front of us. As usual, the webinar is automatically captioned. You can use the CC button in Zoom. And if you would like to ask questions to the speaker, which we of course welcome in these webinars, then please use the Q&A function that you also find in your Zoom panel. And you will find the link to today's free smart guide in English and Swedish, and they will be posted in the chat by the end of this presentation. And today I am happy to introduce to you Sara Källstrand, our research strategist at the foundation, the brains of the whole thing, as I used to call her, and then she always gets annoyed with me, but I dare continue to say that because I think it's true. And she will talk about something extremely important in the European Accessibility Act, namely a pre-normative research study that she has been doing. And also we have been looking into quite interesting things that has to do with non-digital information. Usually we talk a lot about accessibility either in the digital arena or in the built environment or in transportation. But here we are in some kind of in-between, in the middle, and looking at limitations and opportunities when it comes to non-digital information. So please, Sarah, the floor is yours.
So just to give you a bit of the context before starting to dig into what non-digital information is about. In the European Accessibility Act, there are requirements around the accessibility of products and services, such as smartphones and computers and self-service terminals, payment terminals, and e-commerce services. But what use are all these services in terms of accessibility if we can't really understand how to use them? So this means that all information around the products and services also need to be accessible. And a very clear example of this in practice is if you have ever tried to set up a phone or a computer or something else that you bought without having instructions. So that means that the thing you have bought may be completely unusable, inaccessible to you, unless you understand the information on how you can put it into use. So this means that accessible information is key to usability in practice, and that there is also a need for requirements on how accessibility is implemented in the non-digital information, the information on the products and services in the European Accessibility Act. So non-digital information, just simply put, information that is not in electronic form. A lot of it in the different cases in EAA is written information provided on physical media. Could be on packages, could also be just on paper. It's also about spoken information that is not provided via an app or web, like, for example, announcements of traffic information if you are traveling. So it's quite broad. But what information is about in this context, it can be useful to think of it as a one-way process. So you receive information from the provider of the product or the service, and that is opposed to communication. That is more a two-way process where you are, for example, in the contact with support services. So non-digital information, here the emphasis is on information that is provided to you as a user from a provider of a service or a product. And in the European Accessibility Act, it covers quite a lot of different things. The requirements on non-digital information covers both products covered by the EAA, such as the computers and smartphones that we discussed just earlier. It's also non-digital information about services, such as e-commerce. It's also transport information, services related to travel, such as announcements about changes in the travel. And it also covers consumer banking and information received in that context. So it's really quite broad. And there are a lot of different types of examples of information that is covered. It could be signage, if you're at the railway station, looking at the signs of where the trains go, labeling of products, both on the product itself and also on the package that the product is provided in, instructions for use of products and services, travel announcements, and understandable banking information, and information about the accessibility of products and services. So the scope of non-digital information is wide, and it's both long and complicated texts, or also shorter ones, also information that you receive orally. It's very wide scope. So how do you do to make all these types of information accessible? And what we would first recommend, for looking at the research we did for the standardization of requirements for non-digital information, is to look at multiple formats. So multiple formats is really a key way of reaching a wide range of users, because you can never know exactly what the preferences and what the abilities of each individual user are. And you can't really look at different groups of users saying that this type of group needs exactly that sort of information, because there could be forms of multiple disabilities, and there is also a question of preferences. A user could perhaps access information in different ways, but it's more difficult in one format than another. So if you have a wide range of formats, it's easier to ensure that you cover also and reach a wide range of users. These are just some examples of multiple formats. It could be print. So the original information may be in print, and then you could also have large print. You could provide the information digitally in apps or on websites, making sure, of course, that this information is also accessible according to web accessibility requirements. You could provide a format in easy to read, or you could provide it in audio and video, also tactile formats. So this is not an exhaustive list of formats, it's just an example. And the reason I put so much emphasis on this is that there is a minimum requirement also in the European Accessibility Act that you should provide at least one alternative format, but usually to reach a wide range of users, more than one multiple format is preferable. So what is accessible information about? Well, first you need to perceive the information. It needs to be accessible to everybody. And here you could, for example, provide alternative formats such as tactile, braille, large print, digital, all the types of different multiple formats that I just described for the last slide. There is also an issue about how to make written information more accessible through working on font sizes. And these are requirements that are written directly into the European Accessibility Act, that you should look at font sizes not too small so that it's easy to read. And the use of colors, so contrast. And in this context, it could be useful to think about what contrast is and how you measure it. So the contrast is really that you should be able to distinguish the text or the content in relation to the background. And this is measured differently online and on paper. So the measures that you use, for example, in WCAG for contrasts, is not really applicable in the context of paper. And that is something, or on books, for example, it's important to have contrast also on the packages, which is also covered by the directive. And there is the issue of text layout. So having spaces, accessibility, and being able to distinguish text is also about how you can distinguish the specific words and also the groups of words. Usually when people read on paper, read blocks, you read the section at a time. And that makes it easier if you divide the text into different sections and not have just everything in one single block. So the layout and the spacing is also an issue about accessibility. And then when the user has access to the information, it's also important that you understand it, because otherwise you don't really know what to do with the information. If you can read it, but you can't understand it, then you still can't use the product that is supposed to be accessible. So part of it, if we just go into some parts first of an example of the how to make it accessible by spacing. There is an example on what you should not do is to do just one block of information where you have the text going from the left side to the right side just in one block. It can make it very difficult to distinguish parts of it. And then the better way to do it is to have sections where you have a heading and you have quite generous spacing and the bullet point lists, and just have left align texts so that the spacing or the alignment is a bit uneven to the right side. Because if you do spacing or other alignment that goes from one side to the other, it's that spacing between the words, and then it's much more difficult to distinguish each and every word. So I got a bit ahead of myself here. So if I just go back to the issue about understanding information, if we have the accessible information that we can see, but we can't understand it, it's still not accessible. We need to know what to do with it. So understandability is also part of accessibility, and it's also actually part of the European Accessibility Act that recognizes that it's not just enough to access the information, but also it should be understandable for everyone. So, and part of this is, for example, to focus on important information. So if you have instructions for the use of a product and you first get a lot of information on the legal requirements, small prints, everything that has to do with different judicial clauses, and then 10 or 20 pages down the line, you get the information about how you start up your smartphone or you start up your computer. Then you're not really taking the focus of what is important for the user. So when we talk about focus on important information, it's what's information that is important for the user at the time. And this can be done in different ways. So just highlighting in the short text first what's important, and then perhaps making references to more information later on. And also using issues like spacing and layout to make the information stand out from other issues. And then there is also a related question about avoiding complexity. So not to have texts that are too difficult to understand and complex, and it goes also with the reading level. So again, if we take the example of instructions for the use of a product, usually this is quite technical writing, and it's easy to get stuck into jargon. And again, you need to have the user at focus, that these are laypersons that go to read the information and need to know what to do about it. So avoid complexity and reading level. And it's not just long instructions for the use of a product or banking information. It could be as simple as how to open a package. Even if it's short information, it still needs to be quite clear and concise and not use words that may be difficult to understand. And also one thing to remember here is that illustrations can be used as a support for underlining and helping understandability. If you have an illustration that goes closely with the text and shows in a different way how you can use a product, for example. So just to show an example of what you shouldn't and what you should do when it comes to understandability and complexity of text. So, for example, if you want to say, please call us if you have a problem, it could be difficult for the user to understand if you do a long text such as, and I'm quoting here, if there are any points on which you require explanation or further particulars, we shall be glad to furnish such additional details as may be required by telephone, end of quote. So that's a very long and complicated way of saying, if you have any questions, please phone. So just write it in one sentence instead. And what you could also do is to provide an illustration of that, like IKEA is usually doing. They are putting pictures in their instruction manuals where you have a figure with a question mark, looking at the box, what should I do? And then you have an illustration of the person calling into the IKEA warehouse and getting responses. So as I mentioned, digital information can be a way to provide accessible options, but then you need to make sure that you think the whole way through. So first, the digital information needs to be accessible. And the non-digital information still also needs to be accessible in terms of, for example, fonts and understandability and all these other issues. It's not an option just to say that, okay, we don't care about the non-digital information, we'll just do an accessible digital version instead. That doesn't really work. So just to summarize, key tips for providing accessible non-digital information is to provide multiple options, more than one alternative format, to complement the information with accessible information in digital formats, to add spacing and structure for better readability, to use plain language for better understandability, and if possible, it depends on the context, of course, to also use illustration where it's appropriate to reinforce the messages. So thank you very much. Are there any questions?
Thank you very much, Sarah. Yes, we do have questions. They are coming in as we speak. So the first one is there a list of alternative ways or a prioritization? So I think formats.
Yeah, these are two different questions. There is in the context of this presentation is that we are doing a pre-normative research report in the context of the standardization on requirements for non-digital information and solutions on that. And in the report, there is a list of different types of formats that can be provided. But it's just to say that this is not exhaustive. So there's not a finite way of expressing information. And when it comes to prioritization, I would say that this is a bit of a dangerous way to go, again, because you don't know your users. So you can't really know what is the way that is preferred. And if you start to prioritizing, it's quite easy to come into the trap that you are setting the user needs of one group before the user needs of another group. There may be very few persons who need a certain type of information in a certain type of format, but it doesn't mean that they are less important to you as customers and users than others.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that was a very broad and good defined answer, even if we couldn't provide a list of the priorities. But we got another question here. Are the requirements the same as on web, more or less? That's more of a statement, but...
No, I mean, this has been an interesting question that we discussed a lot during the report. It's more or less is a very vague concept, but some of the issues, of course, if you're talking about understandability and layout, then it's the same in web as in non-digital. But then when it comes to other cases that do not really arise in digital, then you need to look at different types of requirements. And one example, as I mentioned, is the contrast. A lot of people think that, oh, I can just use the WCAG criteria, and it doesn't really work on a package. So it's somewhat overlapping, but not completely. So if you think that you are super aware and of everything that has to do with web, I would still urge you to look into the non-digital and the different types of requirements, because it's not completely overlapping. And we also have the issue, for example, if you take something like a QR code that a lot of people perceive as just a digital thing, because it sends a link to a website where you have the information. Well, you still have to print it. So you still have to print on a parcel or on the instructions for use if you are using it in non-digital information. And then you need to think about the perceivability of the QR code. For example, if you need a tactile border, the distance from which you need to scan it, and all these types of things. So those requirements are different from the way that you would use that kind of information on web.
And similar or adjacent to that is also a question about motor impairments. So are motor impairments covered in the package part of this?
It is, absolutely, because that is key information. When you receive a parcel, you need to be able to reach, and also there is the issue of dexterity and the quite complex interrelations between how you understand how to open the package and also the ability to do it from a motor point of view. So it's absolutely covered.
Okay, and there has been a couple of questions around the contrast values and contrast measurement and so on. I don't know if you want to elaborate on that, because I think we have questions both on are the values the same as in digital, and also how do you measure it? Are there tools to measure that, and how do they work? So there's a whole bunch of questions around that.
It's extremely technical and complex, and I would really say to look at the research report when it's published, because there is a discussion on it, and I think it would be too long to get into the technical details of that. But it's just important it's an important point to raise, just so that people don't think that it's completely transferable.
Okay, so another favorite one that comes up almost every time we have a webinar: is there a preferred font to use?
Oh, this is interesting. Well, again, it's about the user, and I'm not really aware of a specific font that is unusable. But what the directive says about fonts, it's really about the size. So the research and probably, I mean, we're not in the standardization phase yet, but it would really be surprising if the standards go into specific details about the types of fonts, because what the directive really says is about the sizes.
Yeah, and what other research tells us, our own and others on research on this, is really that there is no accessible font, even though every now and then somebody claims to have invented a font for dyslexia and so on, but that has very vague connection to science, I would say, and really it's about really user preferences, and our recommendations is always to use standard fonts, because that's technically easier. And also what you do see in research is that users tend to like and read fonts that they have seen before. So if everyone uses the standard fonts, not because they are better than others, but just that you recognize them, and that is also good for readability for many users. So I think that is still valid also here. So another question is understandability now better defined in non-digital than in information as a whole? I think that refers to previous legislation where understandability has only been kind of WCAG oriented. That's what I think is behind this.
Again, this is we're now in the pre-normative phase, and I should say here that since I did the research, I focused on things that I think should be focused on, also on understandability, because it hasn't really been covered enough in different parts. So what the directive says about understandability is also in the line of different other types of directives, that it should be understandable, but not going into detail. So the details here is really more from the point of view of what types of requirements are out there. What does research say? What does users say? We got a lot of comments because we sent out a consultation via the European Disability Forum to their member organizations. And a lot of people say that, well, please focus also on the understandability, because it's not enough just with the perception. And we also have experience from previous projects on the Web Accessibility Directive and consultations, that issues on understandability, easy to read in plain language, comes up again and again across different user groups. But it's too early at this stage to say what types of requirements will actually be in the standard. It's just to say that if you really are serious about making non-digital information accessible to everyone, understandability is also part of what you should look at, regardless really of what the standards and the directive says.
Yeah, that's true, but it also, yes, but it's also in the Accessibility Act, so there is also another reason to look at it, not just that we think it's a good thing to do. So another question is, isn't there a risk of instructions on packages being very small and small size fonts? I think limitation in...
Yeah, this is exactly why they put the requirements on the font size. So what is too small and not, it's going to be a discussion around that. But just because there is this risk, this is why the requirements are there, basically.
Yeah, and there's also a comment here that different fonts have different looks, or are different readable in different sizes. So all of that is kind of the same part of the problem here. And is there an estimate when this report will be published?
Yeah, that's a very precise estimate. In fact, I need to have finished it by the end of December, so it will be published by the end of the year. There's a hard deadline. The whole standardization process has been delayed, so people are eagerly waiting for the report to be able to start, basically.
Okay, thank you very much. I have at least 30 more questions that we do not have time for. These are short webinars, so thank you. If you could put the next slide or next two slides, maybe. Sarah, I would like to thank you for this walkthrough. Very informative as always, and this will be exciting. And I look forward to report when it's, even if I did read a previous version, but when it's published. And we are now going on Christmas holidays, and we will see you for our next Free Friday webinar on the 17th of January 2025. Please join us at that point. And the topic is not a secret, but we haven't really decided it yet, so I can't reveal what it is. But we will continue doing free Friday webinars every second Friday, at least the whole spring. So please join us and have a very good rest of your Friday. Bye-bye, everyone.